Alright, let's go ahead and get started. This is Ms. Fornes, and I am going to be going over your test 1.2K review for Algebra 2. We'll go ahead and get started with number 1. It says, list the dimensions of the following matrices. So just kind of a little bit review. When we're talking about matrices, guys, matrices can be split up into two things, rows and columns. I always tell my kids it's kind of like the periodic table of elements in chemistry, looking at the rows and columns. That's how you find where certain numbers are. So remember, our rows are always horizontal, and then our columns are always vertical. So we always do row by column. And how we do it is we look at the matrix and we write down the number of rows and the number of columns. And so like for this one, the number 1 right here, it says A is 3, 17, negative 5, 21, and 4. So this is one row by how many columns? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. So it's a 1 by 5 matrix. Now I always tell my kids, don't multiply the numbers, like don't say the dimension is 5, because 1 times 5 is 5. You leave it 1 by 5. It's read 1 by 5. So if you look at matrix M right here, same thing, row by column first. So how many rows? Count the horizontals, 1, 2, 3. So 3 rows. And then how many columns? 2. So this is a 3 by 2 matrix. This one, even though there's a fraction, it's okay. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 rows by 1 column. And then this guy, matrix F, is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 rows by 1, 2, 2 columns. That's it. That's your dimensions on how you specify what your matrix is. Remember, these guys right here, these capital letters, that just denotes what the matrix name is, and so how you can differentiate between which matrix. Alright, so let's go. I'm going to go to number 2 over here. It says, given matrix A, determine the following. And so we have lowercase letters and a bunch of subscript numbers. So remember, from class, we talked about matrices. To find numbers or entries in a matrix, you have to ask what is the address. So each one of these numbers has an address to find its location. Just like you have an address on how to get to your house, a matrix is filled with a bunch of numbers, and each one of those numbers has an address to get there. So like if you look at letter A, it says 23. So this is right here the dimension of the matrix, right? So row 2, column 3. So I'm going to look at row 2. So 1, 2, row 2, column 3. 1, 2, 3. And which number got overlapped? That's entry 7. So A23 is the answer 7. So then for here, A54, this is going to be row 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then column 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be this guy right here, negative 5. And then 1, 4, so I'm going to have row number 1 right here. So I'm looking at this top guy right here, and then column 4, so 1, 2, 3, 4, so the last number is 5. And so for part D, it asks, what is the dimension of this matrix? So how many total rows are there? By columns. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5 rows by 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. That's number 2. Alright, so let's go to number 3. Number 3 asks, put the following equations into an augmented matrix. So they don't want us to solve, they just want us to set it up. And so just kind of a little rewind about what an augmented matrix is you want to make sure that your matrix, what I call a standard form, and I always tell my kids standard form, right here. Standard form is when all your x's, y's, and z's line up. So if you have something like x plus y plus z equals like 3, a number, And then I had another equation where I had like 2x plus 3y plus 4z equals 12. Now I'm just making these numbers up. This is in standard form because your x's line up, your y's line up, and your z's line up. I also call this stupid form and opposed to graphing form. Stupid because you can't figure out how it's graphed, but standard wise is you know that all the x's and the y's and the z's line up. So my kids kind of think it's kind of funny when I call it stupid form. But in opposed to graphing versus standard, you can't really tell where it's graphed on a x and y coordinate system, or an x, y, z in this case, but you can still figure out, line up your x, y, z's for the matrix. So if we look at letter, let's go back to the problem. Number 3. So A says I have M, N, and P. So I'm going to line them up. So set up my matrix just like this. So I have M, N, and P. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the leading coefficient. So the leading coefficient of M is 1. The leading coefficient of N is 9, and the leading coefficient of P is 6. Now on this part right here, we don't have all 3 variables, but I have to make sure I line them up. So what is the leading coefficient of M? Remember, we're going M first, then we're going N, then we're going P. So the leading coefficient for the second guy right here is 2. And then N, since there's no N, you can't just leave it blank, you have to put a 0 in its spot. And then the leading coefficient for P is -8. And then the last one, I have an M, so the leading coefficient is 3. For my N, it is -6. And then for my P, it's 2. And so for this part right here, this second matrix is your variable matrix. So put all your variables. So we're comparing M, N, and P. Put it in the exact same order that you wrote down your variables. And then this last matrix after the equal sign is your answers. So it's 5, 12, and -1. That's it. That's your answer for A, just like that. So let's look at matrix, or set up our second matrix. So go ahead and draw out my lines. Alright, so I'm comparing M and N. So M and N. So I'll go ahead and fill in my variable matrix right there. So the coefficient for the first guy is 1, and then it's 2, and then my answer is 11. And then scrolling up just a little bit. For my second guy, there's no M in this equation, so I'm going to put a 0. And our N is a -1, and then our answer is 2. Alright, let's go to letter C. So set up my matrix, set up my variable matrix, and then my answers. So I have M, N, and P is what I'm comparing. So I'm going to write them down, M, N, and P. Alright, first one is -2 is the leading coefficient, then it's 1, then it's 8. Second equation, first one is 8, then I have 2, then -5. Third one is going to be -1, -5, and 1. And then plug in your answers. So your answer would be 6, -3, and 11. So be careful, guys, because sometimes, I always tell my kids, Evil Math Guy will find a way to trick you. When you're looking at your equation, see how it's nice that they line these up M, N, and P, but sometimes they'll try to move things around, or you might have to put everything in standard form because it might be in graphing form. So just make sure you be careful with the signs, because a lot of times, like I said, Evil Math Guy will try to trick you, and you don't want to get caught on the test. Alright, so let's look at letter D. I'm going to go on this side. Okay, so letter D right here. So I have, let's see, 2A plus 3P and minus 5C. So I'm going to set up my matrix. So I have 2, 3, -5. And I'm comparing A, B, and C. And then here, my A, there's no A, so I'm going to put a 0. My b, the leading coefficient in front of the b, even though you don't see it, is a -1. So I'm going to put -1, and then my c is 1. And then this one, see how this one's a little bit confusing because they didn't line it up nicely. So I need to make sure I put my a, b, c all on one side. So I'm going to do it on the left side, and then put my answer number on the right side. So I have, if I move a and c over this way, the signs are going to change. So I have -a plus 2b plus 6c, and then if I move my number to this side, I'm going to get -14. So now when I write it in my matrix, my a is going to be -1, my b is 2, and my c is 6, because it's all lined up, a, b, and c. And then my answer for this guy is -14, but my other answers, I got to make sure I write those guys first. So I have -14 on the top, 11, and then -14 on the bottom. Alright, let's do section part E. So let's see, I have y equals -x plus 4 and -3x equals y. So I need to set everything up in a standard form. So I'm going to move my x over. So I get positive x plus y equals 4. And then for this guy, I'm going to move my y over. So I get -3x minus y, and there's nothing there, so I put a 0. So when I'm setting up my matrix, kind of small, okay, so leading coefficient for these guys are 1, so 1, 1, and then down here leading coefficients are -3, -1, and then I have x, y, and then my answer is just 4, 0. And that's part E. Alright, so let's go to F. Move my paper up. Alright, so F, I'm going to do the same thing. So I have y equals 2x minus 3z. I have 1/2 x plus y equals 0, and then 4 minus 3z equals 6x plus y. Alright, so I want to list them x, then y, then z. Keep in alphabetical order, that'll just help make things a lot easier. So for this first equation right here, I'm going to move, let's see, I'm going to move everything over, so I get -2x. My y is already on this side, and then I'm going to move my z over, so I get plus 3z equals 0. For my second guy, my 1/2 x is already on the left, my y is already on the left, and there's no z, so I'm just going to put a 0z as a placeholder, and I'm going to equal that guy to 0. My last equation, let's see, the 6x is on the right side, so I need to move it to the left side. So I'm going to subtract 6x. Same thing with my y right here. I'm going to move him to the other side, so subtract y. My -3z is already on the left side, so he stays. And then my 4, my number answer, needs to go to the right, so this is going to be -4. Alright, so now that I have everything in standard form, I'm going to write my matrix. So remember, take the leading coefficient, make sure all your variables are lined up. So I have -2, 1, 3, 1/2, 1, 0, -6, -1, -3. And then I'm comparing x, y, z. And then my answers are 0, 0, -4. That is letter F. Alright, so kind of moving on to number 4. Let's see. Sorry, my computer is really loud. So I'm trying to move it away so it's not so loud. Okay, so number 4 says, put the following equations into an augmented matrix equation and solve. So the difference between number 3 and number 4 is now I actually want to get the answer and solve. And so when we're solving, we want to write our matrix a little bit differently because we're going to plug it into our calculator. So if we look at number 4, start with A. So I have 3x minus 1 equals 3z. So I need to move everything, or rewrite it. I need to move everything around. Also be careful, guys. I always tell my kids this. When you're writing z's, sometimes z's can look like 2's. So make sure, I always put a little slash through my z. That just helps so it doesn't get all confusing. Alright, so let's rewrite our equations. So the x is good on this side. So I have 3x. There's no y, so I'm going to write 0y. And I want to move my z over. So I'm going to put minus 3z. And then I want to move this number to the right side. So it's going to equal positive 1. Alright, so on this side of the equation, I want all my x, y, and z's on the left. So I'm going to move the 3x over so the sign changes. So I get positive 3x, and then minus 6y, and then plus 3z. So all their signs are going to change because they're moving to the other side. And then my number now is going to go to the right side of the equation sign. So that needs to be a negative 4. Alright, last equation. So the negative 2x is already on the left, so we're good. The 10y, I need to move this over. So I'm going to subtract 10y, and then plus 6z. And so the only thing left is your negative 7. So there you go. Now we have everything in nice standard form. All my x's line up, all my y's line up, all my z's line up. So I'm going to go ahead and set this up in a matrix form and then plug it in my calculator. So it's going to look like 3, 0, negative 3, 3, negative 6, 3, negative 2, negative 10, 6, right? And then I'm comparing x, y, and z, and then it equals 1, negative 4, negative 7. Now when I'm plugging this into my calculator, I'm going to have to set up my matrix just a little bit differently. So instead of doing a 3 by 3 matrix, I'm going to do a 3 by 4 matrix. So it's going to look like this. 3, 3, negative 2, 0, negative 6, negative 10, negative 3, 3, 6. And then I'm going to put a slash, like a big long line, a vertical line, and then now put my answers. 1, negative 4, negative 7. And now I'm going to try to figure out what my solution is. If you guys remember, getting out your graphing calculator, I'm going to zoom out a little bit. So on your graphing calculator, you're going to hit the second, let me zoom out some more, the second matrix button. So it looks like this, second and matrix, so second matrix, and this should pop up. And I want to go to the edit screen, because right now it's on the matrix screen, and that just means I want to pull up my matrix onto my home screen, but I don't want to do that. I need to edit the numbers in the matrix. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the right to my edit screen, hit enter, and I already have a matrix in there, but I need to fix it. So this whole matrix as 1 is a 3 by 4. So 3 by 4, that stays the same. And now I'm just going to plug in all my info, including the numbers to the right side. So I have 3, 0, negative 3, 1. And then I have 3, negative 6, 3, negative 4. And then negative 2, negative 10, 6, negative 7. So I have all my numbers in there. The next thing I'm going to do is second quit, go to my home screen. And so now what I want to do is, and if you wanted to ever check, guys, if you plug your matrix in right, if you go back to your matrix button, just click on 1 and hit enter, and your matrix should pop up. So you can just double check real quick to make sure, did I plug everything in right? It looks nice, we're good. Now in order to solve, remember this is we want to find our x, y, and z answers, so you're going to go back to your matrix button, so second matrix. I'm going to scroll all the way to the right to where it says math, and then I'm going to scroll down all the way to where it says rough. So RF. It looks like a little, sounds like a little dog. RF. So there's a ref button, but it's a ref. So click on that one. And then I'm going to plug in matrix A. So go back to second matrix. And I want to plug in my first matrix. So hit enter, close parentheses, enter, and then you should get your answer. There it is. So this right here is your identity matrix. And these right here are your answers. So my x is 0. My y is 0.5, which is 1/2 because I hate decimals. And then negative 0.33 is 1/3. So I'm going to write 1/3. It's negative. Don't forget the negative sign. And so I'm going to put my answers in the xy coordinate form. So it's going to be 0, 1/2, negative 1/3, just like that. And that's my answer.